The date was December 10th, 2014. On this day, Kabam and Marvel Entertainment released a game for iOS and Android known as Marvel Contest of Champions. Marvel Contest of Champions is a 1v1 arcade-style fighting game with multiplayer as well as role-playing game elements with a quest and story mode where you're pitted up against a wide range of heroes and villains from the Marvel Universe. Nearly 9 years later, this game seems to be somewhat of an anomaly, as it not only has stood the test of time and is still performing well after all these years, but also has retained a large amount of its original players in a small but tight-knit community, while also picking up many fans and players over the years. Today's game is extremely complex and has expanded to possibly be one of the most skill-intensive and deeply knowledge-based mobile games on the market. Over the past month, as we have seen some big developments in the game, like the first ever in-person Battlegrounds tournament and player summit, the announcement of the newest piece of Everest content, and the somewhat fast emergence and prominence of 7-star champions, I've been doing a lot of research into the history of the game, particularly the history of how progression has worked over the years. Looking back into patch notes, YouTube videos over the years, and even talking to some of the original legends like Brutal DLX has helped me put together what I consider the mostly complete history of progression in MCOC. So, whether you were one of the first summoners to download the game, or you entered the battle realm more recently, it's time to take a look back into the major events that shaped Marvel Contest of Champions over the years. This is going to be a podcast-style video, so grab a cup of tea or maybe a glass of wine, sit back and relax, and let's take a look at the history of progression across the battle realm. Alright, so just a little note about the structure of this video. In the background, I've put together this graphic, which is a visual representation of when the new resources came into the game that allowed summoners to have the first champion of a new rank. So you can see we start with the 4 stars all the way on the left and then make our way to the modern day with the 7-star rank 3 that has just entered the game. So keep this in mind. This is going to be a visual guide as we go. However, I am going to be filling in the gaps with many more events, like really big patches, big buffs and nerfs to champions when content has dropped, and give it all a little bit of context. So with that, let's get started. The game itself, as I mentioned earlier, December 10th, 2014, almost 9 years ago, that was the beginning of the game. The game released with 25 champions, and I think there were a few unplayable champions at that time, and it was a very simple game. There were arenas, there were some story quests. I think it was only Act 1 and Act 2 originally, and I believe the only event quests at that time were to pick up catalysts, like those daily rotating quests. And that was basically the whole game. There were no masteries, there were no alliances, there were no other game modes. So you would collect your champions. 2 and 3 stars were the prominent ones. 4 stars were available, but there really wasn't anything to do with them because the rank up resources needed to get them were extremely rare. I was talking to my friend Mobius about this, and he recalled that the elusive Tier 1 Alpha was only available in the Sunday daily Grandmaster's quest, which was the one that had like all the different colors of catalysts, and it was like an extremely rare chest drop. So people in the early game would literally be spamming this quest over and over again for that like tiny percent chance to get a Tier 1 Alpha. And similarly, Tier 4 class catalysts were so extremely rare that you had to basically like get first place in an arena to get them. There was like a Catalyst Clash arena where first place would give you one, or if you grinded out a champion, like let's say it was Storm's arena and you got first place in the arena, then you would get like a mutant Tier 4 class catalyst. So, 4 stars were there, but they weren't really doing much of anything. So then in the second month of the game, in January of 2015, this was the beginning of awakened abilities. So now when you duped a champ, you got the awakened ability. It's just funny to think of a game where that didn't exist, but at the early game, that wasn't part of the deal. So Platinum Stars started in January. Then in February, this was the beginning of alliances. Now, Alliance Quest, Alliance War did not yet exist at this point, nor did Alliance Events. It was essentially just a way to get together with some friends. You would have the loyalty currency, you would get your energy refilled a little bit. And I think in the early game, there were a few sort of like Alliance Arena events where you combined all the points in the arena and you got some nice rewards too. So there were things like that. But generally speaking, alliances were in their infancy and not much was going on. Now we get to April of 2015, and this was the first introduction of masteries. Now, it is of note that parry and dexterity were not released with the original mastery. So that means the first 5 months of the game, parry and dex did not exist, which is kind of hilarious to think about. The original masteries, I'm not going to really get into exactly what they were, but they were the very basic offense and defense ones. There was obviously no recoil, there was no willpower yet. It was just sort of like the very basic strength and precision and cruelty and things like that. So that was the beginning of masteries. And right around this time, I'm guessing it was around April, it might have been March, we had the first maxed out 4-star. So again, the tier 1 alpha was super rare, but you could grind it technically. And then if you were able to get in arena and get a tier 4 class catalyst, you could take a 4-star all the way to rank 5. And the interesting thing, I talked to Brutal DLX about this because he already had a rank 5 Star Lord 4-star in like April or May of 2015, was that the original rank up recipe for 4-stars only required one tier 4 class catalyst. So he said that there were under 10 summoners that got their first rank 5s, like probably mostly in MMX at that time. And they were the first people to have the maxed out 4-stars. And basically after that, when the rank up recipe changed to needing 3 of the tier 4 class catalysts, this made it like almost impossible to do it for the rest of the year. So I just thought that was really interesting. And you can see on our progression timeline that, you know, we had our first maxed out 4-star in what I'm assuming was around April of 2015. Now, May 2015 was a big month because this was the month that Brutal DLX himself beat Realm of Legends for the first time. Now, Realm of Legends was considered to be an impossible task. Like, obviously, the game developers knew what they were doing. They put this thing out there as a little bit of a carrot for people to try and get done. And, you know, as the legend goes, parry and dexterity were still not in the game. So just keep that in mind that Brutal did this with, you know, with champions like Electro against the Wolverine by just taking block damage and slowly whittling him down because there was no way to deal with that healing. And there was no parry and dexterity. So it was just like muscling through. And that was in May. So the first legend was born in May. And then it was not until July of 2015 that we had some major game updates. We had AQ was first introduced. So season 1 of Alliance Quest, July 2015. And also this was the expansion of the utility tree in Masteries. So we finally got parry and dexterity. So again, it had taken almost 8 months before parry and dex were in the game, and at this point players began a more skill-based style of play where you could evade special attacks instead of blocking them, and you can get your perfect well-timed blocks and starting to parry. So I always thought that was a little interesting to know how late in the game those masteries actually appeared. Now, speaking of masteries, the following month, this was August of 2015, we had the introduction of some new masteries, including willpower, the recoil, and all the other damage masteries in that tree, as well as stuff like inequity and resonate on the tree that was the willpower tree. In the early game, running the recoil tree masteries was almost essential because willpower was absolutely cracked. If you've ever seen how this worked, it worked with how many not unique debuffs, it was how many total debuffs. So like if you had 3 bleeds on you, then you would get a separate proc of willpower. And also it was almost double the potency. So, you know, in the early game, there were champs where, like, say you were using Iron Fist against someone who ran willpower and you were just stacking up those armor breaks with Awakened Iron Fist, it would be almost impossible to kill them in the arena because there were so many debuffs that they were just healing off of and you could not out damage it. So willpower was totally busted. And also if you ran Liquid Courage edge and double edge, you would easily heal back everything. Like you would basically have no penalty. You would heal back the recoil. So in this early stage of the game, it was like everyone was running that if you were able to afford it with the premium currency of units, because like there was zero drawback to it. So that's just something really interesting. So now we get our next big progression milestone, October of 2015. This is when the 5-star crystal became available. And now, technically speaking, rank 2 and rank 3 5-star were already available, because the way that this rank up recipe worked, it only involved tier 4 class catalysts as the most premium resource, and those were already in the game. Now, a lot of people didn't prioritize the 5 stars because 4 stars were more prominent, and people were finally beginning to find ways to be able to rank their 4 stars in 2015, but 5 stars did enter here, and this is a very big milestone anytime we get a new rarity. So then in December of 2015, I just want to make a note that this was the beginning of Alliance Quest Season 2, and this was a time when Tier 4 class catalysts were beginning to be introduced into the game a little bit more regularly. So now, in 2015 December, if you were in the top 500 alliances in the world, you would get a Tier 4 class catalyst every week. Now, it should also be noted that back in July, when AQ was introduced, this was also the introduction of the idea of prestige. Prestige was very nebulous in terms of what it actually meant, but players by this point had figured out that it is the average of your top 5 champions. So especially by the time we got to December 2015, and it was like a tier 4 class catalyst every week, if you were doing AQ with a high enough prestige, this was kind of the beginning of the prestige wars. And like, in my opinion, sort of the renaissance of AQ. And also, because there were not fragments back then, it was only the full tier 4 CC or bust. It really created this sense of like haves and have-nots. If you were doing top AQ, you were getting the resources needed. If you weren't, you were basically getting nothing. So just a little bit of a snapshot into the game at its 1-year anniversary. So now we move ahead to February of 2016. This was the beginning of Alliance War. And now if you played early Alliance War, you know the map that I'm talking about. Every defender was hidden. The outside of the map had some of the most absolute trash nodes of all time, including thorns and slashed tires and things like that. It was just absolutely nuts. Most people were not even able to 100% the map. They would just go for the minis and the boss. And it was really like the Wild West back there, man. Those early Alliance Wars were absolutely crazy. But that did start in February 2016. And they sort of made, if AQ was about getting catalysts, then this was the identity of war being a place to get shards. There were no seasons or anything. It was just like you would do 3 wars a week as part of being in an alliance, and that was just how it went. So now, March 2016, we get our next giant progression milestone that you see on the chart. This was the end of Act 4, and it was the first time that anyone was able to get Tier 2 Alpha. So in the early game, the way resources worked is when you finished a big story progression milestone, like the end of Act 4, that would give you the resources needed to take your champ to the next level. Now, a lot of people were still focusing on 4 stars, so it was only the top players in the game that would like immediately use those tier 2 alpha to get their rank 4 5-star champions. But anyone who completed Act 4 technically was able to get the tier 2 alpha to bring 1 champion up. Most people held on to them and kind of waited till they had the right champion. There were a lot of magics back then. There were a lot of Star Lords. And then, there were even a lot of champs like Captain Marvel, Original, and Storm, and Drax. They were all very popular back in the day just because they tended to do the most damage. But certainly Star-Lord, Magic, I saw a ton of them back in the day when this was all happening. And it's just of note that the first rank 4 5-star, March 2016. So not much happened over the next couple of months, but in July of 2016, we had a major patch. This not only introduced the Despair and Deep Wounds and Assassin tree, but it also was the month that the Perfect Block teams and the willpower mastery were basically nerfed and removed from the game. So what happened here is there used to be a synergy team where and it involved very good champions like Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange, who were really OP back in the day. And you could basically get your block proficiency up to like 100%, so that even without parrying, you could hold block, bait out a heavy attack, and take 0 damage. And in terms of a game balance perspective, this was like really bad because it took a little bit of skill, but not really that much skill. And it just meant that these champions were finishing at 100% health. So they basically removed those. And there was definitely a big to-do about this. A lot of people were really upset about it, especially if people were gearing up to do Realm of Legends and things like that. It really changed the strategy. And the other thing, as we finally saw the willpower nerf, which was needed, they basically halved the value of it, and they changed it so that it was each unique debuff. So that way, if there's like 20 fatigues on you or like 10 armor breaks, it's only 1 proc of willpower, not 10. So this was a big thing. It was funny watching some videos. Like Seaton had a really hot take on this video, and Brian Grant also did. So like, some of the more prominent YouTubers of today were already pretty involved in the fabric of the game. And this was July 2016, a pretty big change that was sort of like the precursor to 12.0 patch. So then it's no doubt like why that happened when it did, because the following month, August 2016, was when we saw Labyrinth of Legends. This was the much anticipated sequel to Realm of Legends. We all know what Labyrinth was when it first came out. It was almost impossible for anyone to even consider doing it. A lot of people used 4-star Star-Lord or 5-star Star-Lord when it first came out. But yeah, this content was just absolutely nuts. It started with that node that was called the dulled node, which was meant to shut down Scarlet Witch so that you couldn't just like crit on every hit. Dulled basically reduced your crit rate to almost like 0. So yeah, original Labyrinth was nuts, but like over the next year, we really saw like the game started to become a modern game, because some of the more prominent YouTubers that are still around now started doing their Labyrinth of Legends clears, and like some of that sort of like classic old content that sort of shaped the community, I think started happening after Labyrinth of Legends was released. I think it was absolutely brilliant, but just make a note in your head that this was August of 2016, and what Labyrinth allowed people to do is it allowed you to get a ton of tier 4 class catalysts, which just like really would help you rank up a bunch of champions. And it also was a big source of tier 2 alpha. So aside from like buying deals and things like that, and Act 4, Labyrinth was really the big place to get more rank 4 5 stars. And this started in August. So now, Labyrinth was kind of like the big hot topic for most of that winter and the beginning of the spring. But I do want to just make a note that the next really big event in the history of MCOC took place in March of 2017. And this was the infamous patch 12.0. So 12.0 was pretty huge because we saw the nerfs and, ability changes of so many champions. Like the big ones were Doctor Strange and, Black Widow and Scarlet Witch and Thor. Like those ones were very famously taken from being like just almost impossible to counter offensive champions to being just like sort of run-of-the-mill good champions. I think this was just an important moment in the game. I think this was a moment where Kabam was like, well, shoot, we have this game that's doing well, and we were just kind of hoping that it would be going for a year or two and, make some money and have fun. But it's like, this game has legs. Like, we need to do something to keep this game going for the future. And, it's not just about the nerfs, because the other big part of 12.0 was the diminishing returns system, which is very much involved in like every character design and every statistical design in the game. It just absolutely changed the math and the way things worked, like crit rating and armor and resistances and things like that. Overnight, everything changed. Like the challenge rating, this is when this was all brought in. And that original 12.0 patch, there were so many bugs and things were sort of overtuned to the point where like it felt like your champs just were never critting. And I don't want to get too much into that history, but the I think it was 12.01 or 12.1, the follow-up patch made things a little bit smoother. And even though a lot of people were outraged by this patch and like so much of the game just changed overnight, when you look back at it, it's probably a good thing that this happened. And, that was just a big moment in time. Now, also with 12.0, we saw the beginning of Map 6 in Alliance Quest, which was a very challenging map at the time. And we also saw a big change to arenas. Again, this is 2017. They basically made it so that more people were able to grind the 4-star arenas and get them. I remember during this period of time doing some very important, like basic 4-star featured grinds. Like I got my magic from a 4-star arena and Hyperion and stuff like that during this time. So they really just sort of changed the way arenas worked and made them a little bit more accessible for getting the 4-star champions. Again, this is March 2017. So then right after that, April 2017, we had AQ Season 4, and this was also the introduction of Glory. So when I was talking about AQ before being like haves and have-nots, the Glory sort of currency system allowed you to be more like tailoring your rewards so that even if you were in a lower alliance, you were able to grab some resources that you might need. So this was a huge change and something that was very good. Now, by the time we got to June 2017, we had our next big progression. This was the first story progression title when 5.2 was released, and this was the uncollected title. So getting through 5.2 during that time was an absolute chore. There was like the masochism map, there was the brute force map, there was stuff like Bane and things like that. Plus the collector at the end of 5.2.6 was just like, no one had ever seen a fight like that before. It just took like so many revives, but like it was totally worth doing because you got your first progression title, which again, this is sort of like setting the scene for the next several years of the game where they started the whole story progression model. So Act 5 was definitely a lot different than the way the Act content works right now, but uncollected title came out in June. So then in August of 2017, we saw sort of a little bit of a change when it came to Alliance War. This was the second iteration of Alliance War maps. If you recall, like I remember doing this map, like it had the buffet node and like some of those Act 5 nodes made it onto the map. So this was like that old map where like eventually there was like some really nasty healing nodes. And I remember like people, once Killmonger came out, always put him on that middle node. Like this is that Alliance War map. It was before Seasons, but it was also the start of gray boosts. So they were obviously setting up Alliance War Seasons a few months later, but this was the big map change in August. Then in December of 2017, we had probably one of the biggest milestones in the history of the game, which was the end of Act 5 and the first rank 5 5-stars. Now, I think actually Brutal DLX was one of the first, if not the first, to get a rank 5 by just going through 5.4 really quickly, and he brought up Stark Enhanced Spider-Man. I remember there was a big deal about that because of prestige and whatnot, but like Starky was just so good back in the day, and this was sort of like Blade had just been introduced to the game, just to give you a little bit of context. So like this was just like a golden age of MCOC, and people still talk about this moment of like tier 5 basic catalysts, right? They were not introduced to the game at all in any kinds of offers or anything. And then when you finished Act 5, you got those 2 generic resources so that if you wanted to, you can max out a single 5-star. It was really a cool moment, really feeling like if you put in the time to do the content, you could get that rank up that you wanted. I think I personally finished it in January, and eventually I pulled Void, and Void was my first rank 5 champion. So like I have a really, really nostalgic time thinking about this. But yeah, December 2017. Also, we saw the uncollected difficulty EQ with the unchallenged title. This was the Murdock release. This was a very, very difficult quest with really good rewards. So again, that was December 2017. So now things are starting to fly. We're starting to see some big changes in the game because in January of 2018, we saw 2 big developments. This was the entrance of 6 stars, right? So now at the beginning of the 6-star life cycle, Rank 2s were technically available, but they were so expensive to get the 3 tier 5 basic that almost no one was rank 2ing their 6 stars. Plus, the pool was a little meh, so not that many people were interested in the 6 stars yet, but this was the beginning of the collection of 6 stars. And also, we saw Alliance War Seasons launch in January of 2018. Now, Alliance War Seasons were huge because the mode was kind of not that important before. It was just about like picking up some shards, but they very clearly wanted to make an elite PvP mode with your alliance because this was the best source of tier 5 basic moving forward, which at the time was the most rare resource in the game. So if you were pushing Alliance War, you were actually getting more tier 5 basic faster than anyone else, and you were able to max out more 5 stars. So this was a really important moment when Alliance War sort of became a more important thing for people to be doing and focusing on. And then after that, there wasn't too much going on. 2018 was definitely one of the most dead years of the game. I think just, Labyrinth had come out, like 6 stars had come out. The game wasn't really sure exactly what they wanted the game to be. I think personally, I was finishing Labyrinth of Legends that year, so I remember like that being my main personal focus. In April of 2018, we saw Dungeons get released. I think this was around like Endgame, the movie, or like Infinity War, one of those. So yeah, this was the beginning of what is now, called Incursions. But this was the beginning of Dungeons, a fully new game mode. Those have seen a lot of development over the years. And, it wasn't until November of 2018. So this is almost a whole year after people got their first rank 5s that we saw a big content drop. And this was the first back issues / variant 1. This was the Ultron's Assault Quest. And at the time, I think this was the hardest piece of content that was ever released, like in its time, because it was so difficult. Like, Labyrinth of Legends was its own amount of difficulty just because of the sheer size and the health pools that you would get through. But like the amount of annoying fights, like I just remember there were like Korgs and Spider-Men and Dominoes everywhere in this quest. And most people didn't have a fully fleshed out 5-star roster, and there were also class gates. I have so many fond memories of just like painfully getting through this content, but it was also one of the most rewarding pieces of content in its time ever. I remember going from having 2 rank 5s to going to having 4 rank 5s at the end of this piece of content. So like I doubled the amount of maxed out 5 stars that I had at the end of it just because the rewards were so juiced. What a time. Also of note, 2018 was the year that, we had stuff like Blade Day happened in February of that year, and the end of the old style featured crystal, right? This is when we went to the more modern version of the featured crystal where there's like 24 champs in it and 6 of them are the featured champs. So in the old days, you used to have like a 20% chance every time you popped one of those crystals to get it featured, and that was changed earlier in the year of 2018. All right, so moving into 2019, the biggest thing in the early year was in February, we had Map 7 introduced, and early Map 7 was absolute trash. Like, it was so difficult and over the top that, like, anyone doing it, basically this was like when Corvus came out, it was just like the Corvus timeouts, right? Like that was the early Map 7. It was like the only way to get through it. And, so that was Map 7. It was very rewarding, and a lot of people tried it when it first came out, but it was just so punishing when it first came out. It was way overtuned and pretty hilarious. Now, the next month after Map 7, we have a big progression title update. This is March 2019. This was the beginning of Act 6, which is a very, well-known piece of content in the history of the game, been nerfed multiple times, but that Act 6.1 came out as well as the new title. This was Cavalier title, and it didn't really feel that epic because like literally the last boss was just like Sentinel or something, but all you had to do is beat 6.1 and you would get Cavalier title. Now, 2019, we saw like some more Act 6 stuff come out, but it kind of like 2018, it was a pretty slow year, but something kind of magical happened in November of 2019, which was we saw the first rank 3 6-star. So that's a big milestone. And unlike the first maxed out 5-star, the way people got to this was a little different. You got basically 25% of a tier 5 class catalyst every time you finished a movement in Act 6. So because it was random, if you got lucky and you got 3 of the same kind, you were already at 75% of one. And now also they had begun to release some offers that had tier 5 class catalyst in them. So if you lucked out with the RNG and you did a little bit of work and got a little bit of the offers leading up to this, you were able to form a rank 3 6-star before content came out that would allow everyone to get it. And this was a bit of a shift, but it's sort of the way the game operates nowadays, where there's more of a balance between spending and doing content. You could argue which way is better. I do think the game is sort of like pendulumed a little bit back to the older model, but I do very specifically remember this was November of 2019. We saw it was Sunspot, the first rank 3, and it was just absolutely nuts that somebody finally had a rank 3 6-star. Now, of note is that it took a very long time to get to this point. When 6-stars were first released, this was January of 2018. So this was almost 2 entire years into their life before we got a new resource allowing them to be ranked up. So, while right now the game feels like it's moving a million miles per hour, I think the 6-star progression was actually pretty slow in comparison to what the 4 and 5 stars were doing before, because it took a very, very long time to get to this point. So also in November of 2019, we had what I call the honor rewards, right? This was the AQ modifiers on map 7. And this became the first regular source of tier 5 class catalyst for summoners before it was released in content. So it was like we saw the first rank 3. Then they released this, which I believe if you did the max modifiers in map 7, you would get 10% of a tier 5 class catalyst per week. And I had just started doing map 7 at this point. This was the end of 2019, where I met a lot of my good friends. And these honor rewards were so OP at the time, because it was really the only place to get tier 5 CC. Now, we had a little bit of a gifting event in December, but then in January of 2020, we had a huge moment. This was the release of Abyss of Legends. So many people remember watching that original Seaton stream and all that stuff, and some people cleared it super fast. But this was sort of the first piece of content that allowed people to start getting their rank 3 champions. 6-stars were still pretty rare, they took a long time to form. So a lot of people may have gotten the resources, but they were waiting for the right champ to bring up. And there really was no pressure to rank 3 unless if you needed prestige. I personally didn't have a rank 3 till I 100%ed the Abyss a little bit later that year, because I was able to get Dr. Doom from it, and I went that way. But anyway, Abyss launch, really big. Eventually the rewards changed to be even better. But when it first came out, it was tier 5 class catalysts and lots of 6-star shards and things like that, and totally worth doing. A couple months later, March 2020, we saw the end of Act 6. So this was when a lot of people were sort of able to get some form of a rank 3 6-star. Now later this year, in October of 2020, we have our next giant milestone, which was the Thronebreaker title. It was announced in September and went live in October. Now by this point, a lot of people had already had their first rank 3, because Abyss had been out for 10 months, and if you were doing AQ, you were getting your tier 5 class catalyst, and hopefully you had a champ that you like to bring up. But there was a big to-do about this Thronebreaker title, because it was actually the first time that a specific rank up was needed in order to get the next progression. It wasn't just beating the content. You actually needed one rank 3 champion. So this, if you've ever heard the term, this was my Thronebreaker rank 3, a lot of people took some liberties in who they ranked up so that they could get the next progression level, in time for stuff like the Black Friday deals and whatever else was going to be coming the rest of that year. But it's just of note that this is a big shift in the way progression story mode worked with the Thronebreaker title. Now, a couple other notable things at the end of 2020. we saw the first instant of Root in a side quest in November 2020. People absolutely hated it, so the game team sort of tabled it, and it didn't come out until over a year later with Craven when we saw the next instance of Root. But yeah, Root as a new game mechanic, kind of the first time we saw that in a while, came out in November. And then in December, we saw the beginning of Act 7, sort of on the heels of Act 6. 7.1 had some of those mashup bosses like the Spider Witch and Gwenperion and stuff like that. So Act 7 also was a major philosophy shift in how story content was driven. It was much less like specific RPG based, and it was a lot more sort of like generic bring in your champions type content. So, a lot of people don't like that shift, but I kind of like the act content. It's not that difficult. And, for sure, December 2020, we saw this shift with Act 7 coming out. So now we've made it to 2021, which largely was going to be the year that we started building up to a rank 4 6-star. Now, kind of like with the rank 3 6 stars, the way that this was built was a little different than what we had seen in the past, where there were just sort of like chunks of it hidden around various deals and various content, and then, one person was able to get their first one before everyone else. So the way that this all started was actually April of 2021. We had a new type of holiday sale, which was like the Deadpool's doubloon / spring cleaning event. So that did not exist before 2021. And this was a little wild because there was one deal toward the top of that set of offers that had just a tiny, tiny bit of tier 3 alpha and tier 6 basic. And people kind of freaked out a little bit because this was really the first time that the new resource that was needed for ranking up your champion to the next level was actually available first in an offer and not in content. So, really, as you've seen up to this point, that has not been the case. Like, obviously, there's usually some kind of content and then it's followed up with offers. But even though it was just a tiny, tiny bit of the material, you kind of felt like if you were trying to be at the edge of the game, you had to pick up these offers so that you could sort of like get in front of people in terms of getting your first rank 4. So that was the first thing. But fortunately, right after that, we did start to see some content that allowed people to get into the rank 4 materials. And that's when I'm going to transition to May of 2021. Right after these deals, we saw the first iterations of Karina's Challenges Volume 1. If you did that 4-star Inhumans or that 4-star Star-Lord one, you know how painful that was. But we were seeing like little drops of rank 4 materials, not in necessarily the act content or in Everest content, but in these like little pieces of content that were coming out. So Karina's was the first of many of those that year. And also that month, we saw sort of the redux of the basic and featured arenas. We finally saw a 6-star arena. I remember like Shang-Chi and Falcon, I think, were the first basic and featured arena. I actually grinded for Falcon in May of 2021. And that's a big shift. 6-star arenas was a big change, and that's of note May 2021. Then the next month, June 2021, we saw the Grandmaster's Gauntlet. To this day, that is one of my favorite pieces of content that ever came out. Again, the rewards were great. It was enough to bite off and do in a month, and like you could use your 5 stars, you could use your 6 stars. It was just such a cool RPG based piece of content, and like I think it's aged even better now that we have more powerful champions. It's able to be completed multiple times now that it's permanent. But yeah, Grandmaster's Gauntlet, really good source of rank 4 materials and sig stones. So, we were kind of seeing like the rank 4s coming a little bit sooner. And then also that month, we had the Summer of Pain, right? The Summer of Pain was like multiple fights and then like a big quest at the end with the Grandmaster as the boss. And again, it had a lot of rank 4 materials. So between doing all these little pieces of content, doing some Act 7 and buying some deals, we saw our first 6-star rank 4 in the game in August of 2021. It was a Doctor Doom. I remember seeing videos about this. But yeah, first rank 4, big milestone, happened in August. Now, in comparison to the first rank 3, it was almost 2 years in between these. So like the game was kind of on a cycle of like every like slightly less than 2 years we would get the next rank. And honestly, from this point on forward, that timeline started to begin to shrink. Things started to become a little bit closer together, and we're going to kind of see why. So we had the first rank 4. Over the next several months, people started getting rank 4s. We also saw the introduction of map 8 in November of 2021, I believe. I might be a month off on that, but it was somewhere at the end of 2021. And then in December of 2021, I think we had one of our more infamous gifting years. Because at that point, if you were playing very competitively, you had one rank 4. I remember in December, because of doing like Karina's and Gauntlet and Map 8 and things like that, I had Apocalypse as a rank 4. And the amount of rank 4 materials that were able to be gotten in gifting really expanded the amount of rank 4s available to the highest spenders in the game. And at the time, that seemed out of place. But looking at how the game follows up on having big, spending offers like that, and then sort of like promises content to come out after, I actually don't think it's as big a deal as myself and other people made. But I do need to just bring up that 2021 gifting, I think, was the most infamous gifting. And it also sort of led to the banquet in future years instead of gifting, because it was just kind of all over the place, right? So that was the beginning. We're starting to see rank 4s really bloom and start to happen over the next year. January 2022. So now we're getting close to the end here. But this was the first time we had strikers. There was a quest with strikers. Obviously, now we know that this was building toward relics. But at the time, it was just sort of a cool feature that would appear every once in a while as strikers. So just make note, January 2022. Now, March 2022, we had Act 7.4. For me personally, this is when I was able to get my second rank 4 champion. And then March was just like a massive content drop, if I recall, because Karina's Challenges 2 also came out. These went over a lot better than Karina's 1. I think a lot of people had fun with these. There were some Abyss ones that, I remember the one where I used Null in the Spider-Verse and Sinister 6 one was so much fun in the Abyss. Like, some of them were a little grindy, but like, yeah, Karina's 2, big shout out to J. Nick who designed those. Those were awesome and very rewarding. And then I believe in May of 2022, we had Paragon. Now, Paragon was a big step up from Thronebreaker because you actually needed 3 rank 4 champions. And I personally remember being a little bit behind the 8 ball on this and having to like really finish out Karina's challenges and do some stuff like that in order to get to Paragon. And the thing was, you really wanted to get to Paragon before July of 2022 because that was the start of Eternity of Pain, right? The follow-up to Summer of Pain in July of 2022. And they had Paragon objectives. So like if you were still Thronebreaker in July, you were missing out on a ton of rank 4 materials. And it was something very, very important to get done quickly. So May was Paragon, big milestone. July, EOP start. September, we saw the launch of Battlegrounds, September of 2022, and that has forever changed the competitive side of the game. The Battlegrounds store is so rewarding. It's really just added this like one player, single player mode where it's super competitive. It's culminated in the Battle Realm Brawl this year. I just think it was been so good for the game. We've seen player run tournaments and everything. So Battlegrounds, huge moment for the game, September 2022. And then following up from that, we had November 2022, which was the start of Relics. Now, Relics are finally integrated into the entire game. Just having the striker is so important to the flow of any game mode right now. And obviously, we're seeing in some of the newer content that using the striker is giving you benefits on your champions and things like that. So, big moment in the game, November, Relics. And then we have basically what's going to be like a cascading amount of milestones in these last few bullet points here. December 2022, we had the banquet, which was not gifting, it was the banquet. And we had the first rank 5 6 stars, which were available from people just buying a ton of those banquet crystals. And, infamously, there were like people like Magus that had like 5 of them or something like that. But, essentially, people were starting to have the ability to form some tier 6 class catalysts, but like if you just went crazy on banquet, you were able to form multiple and be able to get into that next level, which was the maxed out 6-star. Now, the big change for me that I think was positive was that there was an immediate follow-up in January of 2023 with Karina's Volume 3 / The End of Eternity of Pain, where everybody got a rank 5 gem if you did the content. So this meant, if you wailed out on the banquet, you could get a rank 5 or multiple rank 5s. But then there was sort of that promise of like, hey, if you're grinding out content, here you go. Karina's 3, first rank 5. So, while it is listed as December 2022, for a large portion of the player base, by January, first rank 5s. So now that was the beginning of this year, this very year that we're in, right? So let's just do like the major points of this past year. May, we saw the release of 7 stars. Now, 7 stars could essentially be ranked 2'd immediately. And also 7 stars when they came out were way more powerful than 6 stars when they first came out. I've got a whole video on this, but essentially you have the full combat power rate of a maxed out champion, which is huge. You have a much higher challenge rating, which means that you're definitely punching down when you're fighting 6 stars, and 6 stars are definitely punching up when fighting 7 stars. And also the pool of champions was pretty legit. Like, these were good champions that you could start using on your roster immediately. And we've seen ways to get 7 stars in creative ways through the additional currency and deals and things like that that are way faster than 6 stars ever were. And then additionally, the rank 1 potency and the rank 2 potency is like way stronger than 6 stars. Like rank 2 7 stars in the current game are so powerful statistically that 7 stars have made a huge splash, and it was very different. And we could see from the get-go that this journey through the 7 stars, it was going to be different than the 6 stars. So immediately rank 2 was available. Immediately many people were choosing to rank 2 them over rank 5ing more of the 6 stars. We had July 4th, which was probably the most insane set of deals that we've ever seen. Like, the limit was raised for the amount of units and amount of dollars that you could spend. Tons of rank 5 materials, tons of tier 6 class catalysts. It definitely was sort of a ground shaking moment for a lot of people. And then in September, we had the beginning of Ascension. So now, even though the 7 stars are flying, 6 stars starting in September, everybody has been able to gain as many as 2 ascensions by this point, which basically makes your 6 stars feel like 7-star rank 2 in terms of their base stats. And then already, just, 5 months after the release of 7 stars, we have the first rank 3. Now, rank 2 was immediately available using the older resource of tier 6 class catalysts, but now we're seeing the rank 3 gems, and technically speaking, this is the introduction of the new resource, which is tier 4 alpha that you can see at the bottom there. And, we've already been told Cyber Weekend there's going to be tier 4 alpha this year. We know that Necropolis is being released next month, like actually just in a week. And that's going to be a place, even on completion, that anybody that completes it can get a rank 3 7-star champion. So, while currently FinTech is the only one with a rank 3, with his rank 3 Silk from winning the Battle Realm Brawl, which I thought was an awesome move, we're already seeing the follow-up in both deals for Cyber Weekend and completion and exploration of the Necropolis, which in itself is a big content drop. It's a major moment in the game where the next Everest comes out. And then finally, the last thing on our map here is the Valiant title, which requires 2 rank 3 7-star champions. And we've already been told there's a few roads to do this. If you 100% Necro, you get it. If you complete Necropolis and you buy like every deal on Cyber Weekend, you can get it, or some combination of both. They also said that coming out next year in the spring, we're going to see the end of Act 8, which will also guarantee one. So I think for most people, you're not going to be Valiant in time for the deals this year. Maybe by the end of the year, you'll be Valiant to get that like Valiant Christmas gift or whatever it is. But yeah, so some final conclusions here, right? This game is like insane. Like, I just can't believe that the game is still going after all these years. And, at this moment in time, things are progressing very quickly. Like, I think even for myself, it's a little uncomfortably quick. Hopefully things slow down a little bit after rank 3. I don't know if that's really going to happen or not. But, I think one of the biggest takeaways of making this graphic is that the lifetime of 6 stars, it was very slow. And like, now, in all fairness, a large portion of the history of our game was the life of 6 stars. Like, that bridged through the entire COVID pandemic and even 2 years before and 2 years after that. And so like, a lot of what we know about this game is the way 6 stars progressed, and they were very slow. They were not powerful. They were not good champions when they came out. The resources were very slow to come out over time. And now 7 stars come out like immediately more powerful than 6 stars. Immediately people are using them in war and in battlegrounds and all over the place. And we're seeing rank 3 within 5 months of their release. Perhaps it's a little bit of an overcompensation, but I guess we just have to trust that this is the way the game's going to progress from now on. There are certainly a lot of exciting things happening in the game at this moment. I'm personally enjoying it. I think the thing I enjoy about the game the most right now is there's so much to do that I know I can't do it all. So I actually get to choose the things I want to do, the time that I want to spend in the game, without personally feeling like if I don't 100% everything, incursions and pushing battlegrounds and high tier war and all that stuff. For me personally, I just know I can't keep all that together. But doing even some of the game at a high level and trying to like manage my time has been really rewarding. I've got a really fun roster. I get to use some champions that I really like, and looking forward to diving into the Necropolis. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I know it was long, but I did spend a lot of time doing all this research. Let me know what you think. If there were any memorable moments for you in Marvel Contest of Champions that you think I left out that are worthy of making it onto this timeline, please let me know. How are you feeling? Are you feeling like the game's moving too fast? Are you just along for the ride? Either way, I'm pretty jazzed about the way the game is going. It's been really fun. And at the core of it, always is the friendships, the people that you play the game with in and out every day. I think that's the reason that this game has sustained for so long, is that we've just met these really cool people along the way, and we enjoy talking about the game and playing the game with them. Let me know your thoughts. Hope you enjoyed this one. Have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.